A gray sky looms over a quiet prison parking lot as Amina, a woman in her late 30s, steps out of her car. She glances around nervously, her fingers trembling as she smooths her hair, trying to steady herself. Thoughts race through her mind. Sometimes, life changes in ways you'd never expect. It only takes a single choice. For me, that choice was coming here. Inside the dimly lit visitation room, Amina sits alone, eyes fixed on the steel door across from her. The distant clank of prison gates echoes, raising the tension. Meanwhile, Dante, a rugged, intense man in his early 40s, is led down the prison hallway by a guard. His gaze is fierce, his demeanor simmering with a controlled edge. As he enters the visitation room, Amina feels the weight of her wedding ring and clutches her hand, struggling with the guilt beneath her thrill. The two lock eyes, and the world seems to fade away, leaving only a forbidden connection that both terrifies and excites her. Dante's smirk deepens. "Missed me." Amina's face lights up briefly before reality pulls her back, her voice whispering in her mind. "I had no idea how much I'd lose in this prison, or how far I'd go to feel alive again. And now, there's no turning back." Amina wasn't always the woman sitting nervously in a prison visitation room. Her life was once calm, steady. At home, her husband, Michael, was the picture of stability. A hard-working, dependable man, but often preoccupied, caught up in his career and the comfortable routine they'd built together. Their conversations had become repetitive, their connection strained. Amina felt invisible, yearning for something more, a spark that had faded over the years. The routine became a kind of prison of its own. That's when Amina decided to volunteer, hoping to fill the emptiness she'd been feeling. She joined a local outreach program, visiting inmates to provide support, offer a listening ear, and simply bring a small light into their world. That's where she first met Dante. With his intense gaze and a charisma that stood out against the harshness of prison life, Dante was different. He noticed her in a way she hadn't felt in years, his words always tinged with just enough charm and intrigue to pull her in. Amina tried to keep it professional, yet there was something about him that made her feel seen and alive. Her regular visits to the prison became more than volunteer work. They became the escape she craved, and soon she was drawn deeper into Dante's world. This growing connection began to chip away at her composure, leading Amina to question how far she was willing to go to reclaim the excitement missing from her life. "What would you do if you felt invisible?" she asked herself, never fully prepared for the answer she was slowly uncovering. Michael had always been her rock, reliable, calm, the kind of man who lived for routine. His life was structured, predictable, and every detail about him reflected that stability. He dressed in neat, subdued colors, kept his conversations focused on work, and never let a hint of excitement disturb his carefully ordered world. Amina had once found comfort in Michael's steadiness. It was why she married him. But as the years passed, she found herself craving something more, a feeling that could shake her out of the gray haze her life had become. Dante was nothing like Michael. He wore his charisma like an invisible armor, his rough charm drawing her in with every encounter. While Michael's words were precise, chosen to avoid confrontation, Dante's were bold, laced with a daring edge that made her heart beat faster. The thrill Amina felt each time she sat across from Dante in that cold visitation room couldn't be ignored. His eyes would meet hers with an intensity that both terrified and captivated her. Each time she returned home to Michael, the contrast only grew starker. Her husband, with his reassuring predictability, began to feel like a stranger, his quiet affection no longer enough to fill the hollow feeling inside her. Amina became aware of this divide, and it terrified her. But each day she found herself wanting to slip deeper into the dangerous, thrilling world Dante offered, even if it meant crossing a line she never imagined she would. The connection between Amina and Dante had shifted from simple conversation to something deeper, something unspoken yet undeniable. One evening, as they sat in the visitation room, Dante reached across the table, his hand brushing hers in a way that sent a jolt through her. In that fleeting touch, Amina felt a mix of exhilaration and guilt, yet she couldn't bring herself to pull away. With Dante, she was someone else, someone daring, someone wanted. But just when Amina thought she had control over this secret world she'd built with him, Dante's intentions became disturbingly clear. One evening, as he leaned in close, his voice softened to a low whisper. He told her he had a plan. A way out of prison. He painted a picture of freedom, of the life they could share on the outside. Amina's heart pounded at his words, her mind torn between disbelief and the thrill of possibility. Then Dante's tone changed. He began to hint that he would need her help to make his escape possible. The charming man she'd risked everything to be near now looked at her with an intensity that was almost predatory. He wasn't asking, she realized. He was expecting. Amina's stomach twisted as she began to see the dangerous game he'd been playing. Every moment they shared, every word he spoke had been carefully chosen to pull her in, to turn her into the means to his freedom. Suddenly, the thrilling connection she'd shared with Dante felt like a trap. Her heart raced, her hands clammy as she listened to him lay out his plan. She was in deeper than she'd ever intended, entangled in a secret that could destroy her life, her marriage, and everything she'd once held dear. But looking at Dante, she couldn't decide if she wanted to run or to keep going, to risk everything for the taste of something real. Amina couldn't shake the unease that now filled her every time she stepped into the prison. The once thrilling meetings with Dante had turned into tense exchanges, each one pulling her further into his plans. She tried to tell herself she could walk away, leave Dante behind, but his words haunted her. "You wouldn't abandon me now, would you?" he'd asked, a hint of warning in his tone. His eyes held hers, making her feel as though he already owned a part of her she could never reclaim. At home, the strain began to show. Michael noticed her distance, the way she was lost in thought, and started to ask questions she struggled to answer. In the silence of their once peaceful evenings, she felt trapped in a web of her own making. Her guilt was nearly unbearable, and yet she couldn't bring herself to confess the truth to Michael. If she told him, it would ruin everything. But if she stayed silent, she knew she risked losing herself entirely to the shadowy world Dante had drawn her into. Late one night, Amina sat alone, the weight of her choices pressing down on her. The stakes had grown too high to ignore. She was caught between two lives, the safe, predictable one she shared with Michael, and the thrilling, dangerous one that beckoned her from behind prison walls. She knew that helping Dante escape could destroy her life as she knew it, but each time she considered backing out, the fear of what Dante might do kept her tethered to him. Her once exciting connection with him had turned into something darker, and she felt as if she were teetering on the edge of a precipice, powerless to pull herself back. As Amina lay awake that night, she felt the crushing weight of her double life and the terrifying possibility that, no matter what she chose, she'd lose everything. Her heart ached with the realization that she was no longer in control. Dante held her fate, and with each passing day, she felt herself slipping further into a place she could never return from. Amina knew she couldn't keep this to herself forever. One afternoon, after struggling alone for so long, she confided in her best friend, Lydia. Lydia was the one person who'd always been there for her, someone who knew her better than anyone else. Sitting across from Lydia in a quiet cafe, Amina finally let the truth spill out, her voice barely a whisper as she explained the twisted relationship that had taken over her life. Lydia listened intently, her face shifting from shock to concern. "Do you realize how dangerous this is, Amina?" Lydia's voice trembled, her expression a mix of worry and frustration. "This isn't just some harmless escape. You could lose everything." Amina nodded, her eyes downcast. She knew Lydia was right, but she also felt trapped, unable to find a way out without devastating everyone she cared about. At home, Michael continued to notice Amina's absence. not just physically but emotionally. Over dinner one evening, he tried to bring it up, his voice tentative. "You've seemed different lately, Amina. Distant. Is everything all right?" His eyes searched hers, hopeful yet anxious. Amina forced a smile, brushing off his concerns with a laugh, but inside, her heart clenched. She knew she was losing him, that her silence was pushing them further apart. Each time she felt Michael's concerned gaze or heard Lydia's words echoing in her mind, the weight of her choices grew heavier. She could see the toll it was taking, not just on herself, but on those around her. She was caught between worlds, bound by a secret that threatened to shatter her life. In her search for excitement, she had unknowingly created a ripple that was slowly unraveling everything familiar, pulling her friends and family into the tangled mess of her double life.